So I apologies that this episode didn't come out on Wednesday, as is the typical plan. It's just that I lost track of time with a lot of other stuff going on. But yeah, this episode's out now, and so next week's episode should hopefully be out on Wednesday as well. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode about the movies with William Fletcher. As per usual, I am your host, William Fletcher, and I am joined this week by Barney Metcalf, as is becoming
Howdy do.
as is becoming the standard for this show. And for this week's episode, we're going to be looking at Hereditary and Midsummer, Ari Aster's two directed features in anticipation of Beau Is Afraid, which isn't out when this episode will be going out, but I wanted to talk about these films anyway, and we'll talk about Beau Is Afraid at the end of this, and also once we've seen it, it will be covered in the review of the year episode. So I rewatched Hereditary today for the purposes of this. I did not rewatch Midsummer, but I watched it at the end of last year, so I'm not as bothered by that.
I mean, neither of us rewatched Midsummer. I remember it fairly well though, so in a way, I couldn't be bothered.
Yeah. So yeah, I watched So I watched both of them for the first time last year, and I will say that watching Hereditary during the day probably affected my feelings a bit because I don't think it's quite as effective. Look, to just get right into it, to start with Hereditary. Yeah, I just don't. It definitely feels like it should be a film that you watch late at night to really get the full experience.
Yeah, which is what I did. I watched it. I started it at about 11 p.m. It was a
Uh,
very spooky experience.
yeah, I rewatched it for this, and I think I think it's a solid contender for one of the scariest films I've ever seen.
I think I'd agree with that. Yeah, I think it's very scary.
I put it up there with Robert Eggers' The Vivitch, but that film's a bit too boring for me to fully love it. I'm aware that the 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers is quite unnerving as well. I have not seen it. I believe you have, right?
I have. Yeah, no, I find that film quite effective as well. Although I would say that I think Hereditary does trump it a bit in terms of being immediately scary.
Yeah. I don't think I've covered many horror films on this podcast. I'm just having a look now. We did the Halloween films, but that was not really. That's not the same thing. I did It Follows, which again, a Reanimator, I guess, is kind of horror, but that's more comedy. I feel like
Yeah, it's horror.
there's more of a comedic edge to that film. I'm just looking at what else I have done on the show, but in general, I think for me, horror, I'm not affected by intense violence. I'm more into psychological horror, and I don't.
Oh, well, this film kind of does both of that.
It does a bit, yeah, but it's not one like slashes in general. I
Yeah,
don't.
it's not, no, it's by no means. People aren't dropping dead left, right, and center. You know.
Yeah, and I think that's a problem. I appreciate that this goes for a more character sort of base. It's analyzing these characters. It's about, this woman, she loses her mom and then her one of her fucking kids. It's terrible, and it's just like she's sort of losing it, and I think that there is some really fucking unnerving like imagery in this. Like there is some stuff that
Yeah, no, I
is
mean, I think that holds up between both of these films. Ari Aster's mind is a place I do not want to go because it's very disturbing.
yeah. I don't I
And
never found Midsummer to be especially scary personally.
no, and I'll get into why later, but I think there are definitely some images that are
Hmm. Yeah.
off-putting.
But yeah, for Hereditary, I first watched this last year late at night, and just something about probably my favorite shot of the whole film is when Alex Wolf, he's the kid, and he's sitting on his
With yeah,
bed, and then there's just in the background, it's like obscured by shadows. There's just Tony Collette just like in the corner, just like above him,
yeah,
like
I definitely heard about that when I first watched it back in 2019 before Midsummer.
mm,
Um, and I'd forgotten about it this time around.
yeah,
And just as it like moved to the next shot, I was like, "Oh shit, there she is!"
yeah. Because I do remember there's the bit where she like runs across like the wall or something with, but I completely forgot that she's just like there, and I was like, oh, that terrifies me. Just the
Yeah,
idea of like I've had this thing where I think there's a bit where it's implied Alex Wolf's character he like sees a chair or something, and I think it's implied that he sees like his sister there or something. Or maybe I'm just
yeah. No, he definitely is meant to see Charlie,
Charlie
his
there,
sister
yeah.
who
And
died.
I've had that before where I wake up in the middle of the night and there's just like a human fucking shape in my room, and I'm like, what the oh fuck, and I'm
In
genuinely like,
terms
oh
of how this film affects me, I finished the film and I was like, "Oh, I really need to go to the toilet." And I was like, "Ah, man, I don't want to. Oh, go to the toilet in the middle of the night. That's fucking gonna creep me out."
yeah, this is like it's a genuinely quite unnerving film to watch. It really just yeah, and like the few moments where there is violence, it's raw and brutal. Like it's not
I was like, brutal is the word
like it's
for it.
not like something like the Scream films have a lot more violence in them, but it's not really that yeah brutal. It's big stabs is awful, but it never feels like it's I don't know what the word I'm looking for is exactly, but like Hereditary, like at the end where she's fucking sawing off her own head, just like
With the piano wire.
yeah, like that is one of the most horrifying just like images and just like ideas.
Ideas. Yeah,
Like,
that's
and I know I've heard
incredible.
stuff about the new Evil Dead film with a cheese grater, and I'm like, oh,
Oh, I
that's
haven't
gonna
heard about that,
that's
but
gonna
that's already putting him in
yeah,
head.
and I'm like, that's gonna be. A lot of the time it really takes a lot for me to cringe while watching like violence. Like eh, like
Like audibly going, ooh.
yeah, and it's like I'm trying to think of examples of films where I like actively cringe while watching like of something like I can't think of anything really off the
I
top of
mean,
my head.
this and Midsummer are two of the examples for me.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, besides this film, of course, I think yeah, just it's so, and there's some great image in both of these films. There is some fantastic imagery that I did not. When I first watched this, I did not expect to see a shot of a child's decapitated head covered in ants.
But yeah, decomposing.
Like that is so you don't really see that in horror either. Like you never see yes something
Dead
that
children are kind of
horrific.
like a sacred cow in.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you don't kill like a dog or any like in horror is what you sort of like you it's
Well,
sort of
and if you
in
do, you don't show it
yeah,
that much.
exactly. Like it's always implied. But yeah,
Whereas, yeah, for those who are listening to this podcast and for some reason don't know, um, yeah, the young daughter Charlie is having an allergic reaction. And her brother drives her to the hospital. She puts her head out the window to breathe, and he has to swerve out the way of a deer in the road, and she gets decapitated because they go past
yeah.
an electrical pole.
I will say
Um,
that didn't quite work for me as well. Like the shot of her head like kind of it felt a bit unintentionally funny. Like, I don't know. Like, maybe it's because I was
You.
expecting it, and because I do not think children being decapitated is funny. I think just the way it's done feels a bit. I don't know. Maybe I think because the first time I wasn't expecting it. I did not expect a child to
I still
suddenly.
think it works effectively. It definitely made me, you know, I didn't, I guess, react to it, but in my head, I was like, oh man,
Yeah. Um.
that's a yikes from.
Yeah. It's. But yeah. So yeah, Tony Collette, amazing in it, and she fucking hell.
No, this is a very
This is probably the best thing.
award-starved performance.
Yeah, I think this is probably her best work, and I've seen her in quite a few things. I think this is far and away the best work of her career. I'm just looking at other films I've seen her in. I've seen her in Knives Out. Yeah, she's alright in that. I think she like her in The Sixth Sense.
I forget she's in it. Both of those.
In Knives Out, yeah,
This
she's one of the
essentially
yeah.
is kind of what I think of her as being in.
Mm,
I guess
um,
in Australia, she's probably best known for Muriel's Wedding.
yeah, probably. Yeah, I know. I think she's really great, and again, this is one of those performances that could be so over the top and
She
just
plays
at like a
just the right level.
pitch perfect level of like, she has like sort of the subtler moments, but when she's like yelling and shouting, it doesn't take me out. Because that's a problem I have with some films when characters start shouting and yelling and crying. It feels like, okay, you're just like, this is a bit much, and I'm not.
It's like, oh, look at you, you're doing big acting.
Yeah, but I think Toni Collette sort of nails that level and very much toes the line.
There's a moment very near the end of the film where what was it? She throws something in a fire, and her husband, starts burning alive.
Oh, dude, yeah. And she's like
It's quite a
horrified.
famous shot.
And then
And,
she's
and
like,
then her brain just kind of snaps because she gets. Well, we'll go into the twist, I guess,
yeah.
in a minute.
But yeah, just the way it I think, to be fair, beyond Toni Collette, I think the acting in general is actually really good. Like, everybody talks about how
Yeah,
great Toni Collette is, as they should. She is amazing in it, but I think Alex
yeah.
Wolff actually does a really nice job
Alex
with
Wolff.
it.
Yeah, he's the one that really stood out to me this time. As being like, oh no, you're doing some really great acting
Yeah,
here.
and there's just some of that like unnerving where he's like looking in like the mirror, and there's just him looking back, like just like smirking. Like something about that is so much more unnerving than it should be in theory.
What's up with smiling in horror films?
I don't know. I think it's yeah, Smile. Yeah, last year. I don't know, but something about that imagery feels it's more unnerving than it should be in theory because it should be like
Yeah,
kind of dumb. It like it shouldn't be that effective, but just the way it just like and there are some great camera shots as well, just the way the camera moves at times.
I think this film is really well directed.
Yeah, no, I think Ari Aster debut film, and he does a great job with it. Like I think he does a
Yeah, and I think he's
fantastic
very talented.
job with it, and I think he, yeah, and he writes the films as well. He's a very competent director who does a lot of really good stuff with his films, and I think I, yeah, I just think this film, like overall, I do really like this film. Not as much as when I initially saw it, but I still think it is a good film. Like I
I,
was.
I liked it more than I did the first time around, but I
Mm,
think, and we were talking about the kind of the gore a bit more earlier, but I think it's at a point where it's maybe a bit too unsettling for me. It does,
mm,
I don't know, it affects me a bit more.
yeah, I that definitely that I didn't have it with this one, but I have had it with films before where a film is just a bit too like, oh, this is a bit much for me. Like this is
It gets
really
under your skin a
great,
little too
and I really like what they're doing here, but it does sort of affect my feelings on the film as well, because it's like I can't like because not I'm not saying every film should be something that like, oh, I can't wait to watch that again, or that you can just like pop on. I'm not saying that, but I do think some films are just like, cool. So do I like where I'm like, do I want to watch this again? Like, is this a film I want to? And
Yeah,
I don't think Hereditary is that for me, but I can see how it is unnerving for someone else. For other
it's
people.
something where it's like if I'm watching it, I'll go into it thinking, oh, this is a bit of a task. But I think there is definitely rewatch value to it,
Hmm.
and I think that is thanks to some very strong writing.
Yeah, I think the writing. I think like this isn't just a lot of the time, not a lot of the time, but a decent amount. Films often feel like they either have fantastic directing with like decent writing, or amazing writing with decent directing. Like a lot of the time, I feel it's hard for certain
Very,
people.
it's not that common that you get both.
Yeah, both like I very rarely think because one is obviously like a standout, like something like I would go Martin McDonagh. His films stand out more because of the writing as opposed to the directing,
Yeah,
for example. Whereas Steven Spielberg films generally stand out more in the directing than the writing, for the most part. Not everything, but I think in general a lot of films have standout elements with like one or the other, but I think this is a nice combination of the two. I do think the writing is better than the directing, but I think there's a lot of potential from this film. Like you can watch this film and be like, okay, so this director, he knows what he's doing, and he's gonna do something, and he's
yeah,
gonna do
you can
great shit in
definitely
the
tell
future.
this is a man in control of his film.
Yeah, and again, this is like his debut feature. Like this is like that's insane that someone can this can be a debut film and still be this great. Like it, and it is interesting that because when you just because I know we've talked, but like the landscape of film and cinema has changed. It's a lot harder for directors to get like Ari Aster is sort of a very recent example of someone who just sort of comes out of nowhere and just has this massive hit and just gets a career off it. But you don't see that as often. I feel like a lot of directors struggle to get stuff shown, and that's just the evolution and the change of the cinema. But it is nice to know there are still brilliant auteurs who can just come out of nowhere and just do really
Make a
well.
film and move their career now.
Exactly, yeah. Like I think like the Daniels who directed Everything Everywhere All at Once, like it's not like that was their first film, but it was it was a very big deal, and it
Yeah,
has sort of launched their career to a wider stratosphere now because everybody
they're
knows who
definitely
they are.
on a bigger level than they were when they did like Swiss Army Man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, and I think yeah, Hereditary just as a film, I think is a very very probably one of the best film debuts that I've certainly seen. I think it's incredibly well put together because a lot of film debut films are kind of shit. Even from guys like Spielberg
And
and
if they're not shit, they're still a
Scorsese.
bit shaky.
Yeah, but this feels like someone who's directed multiple films already. Like this doesn't feel like it should be a first film, and it is
Yeah,
quite upsetting that someone's this talented with like
it's
one
annoying that
feature.
something's the same.
And it's just like, oh man, I wish I could be that good. It's quite like, oh, this guy just knows what he's
It's
doing.
both inspiring and disheartening.
Yeah, because like, yeah, um, but yeah. So I think this film. I mean, yeah, I think this is a really great. I think both of these are really great films. It's just my general thoughts. I think these are good films. I think Ari Aster is a great filmmaker. Um, and yeah, as I was watching it. There's a bit in the film where, well, first like where this is after Charlie has been killed and Alex Wolfie's what is his character's name? I probably should know his character's name.
Peter?
Yeah, and he's smoking weed. They're smoking weed under the fucking like bleachers at school, like which is such a feels. weird because it's not that weird because my high school people did.
It's the kind of the high school thing
Yeah,
in movies.
but yeah, and my point was, I there was a bit when they're under the bleachers, like, are they smoking weed? Yeah, they're like smoking weed.
I assume so.
Yeah, and they're doing drugs. Um, and when Alex starts like choking or whatever, which man, it must suck being allergic to things though. Like I'm not allergic
Yeah,
as far as I'm concerned, but I can't imagine it's pleasant.
I did
Um,
find myself thinking early on when they're at the like the wake of the funeral. And Tony Collette says, "Oh, we don't have the EpiPen with us," and I was like, "Why would you have a child that is like deadly allergic to something and not carry the EpiPen with everywhere they go?"
yeah, that's fucking craziness. Actually, I
Um,
I just remembered something else from my high school. Someone stole someone's EpiPen at school once, which
oh,
is
what?
just monumentally shitty. Like, who of all the things to steal, stealing their clothes, fucking whatever, but a fucking EpiPen, like that is
An
the
EpiPen,
worst
the
thing you.
life-saving bit of medication.
That is the worst thing you could steal from someone. Even their phone wouldn't be as bad because they don't. You don't need a phone to live, but you do need a fucking
Yeah.
EpiPen. But yeah, and I remembered that when she brought mentioned the EpiPen, I'm like, oh, that's right. She is allergic to things, and that's why her head comes off because they're driving the shit. Yeah,
Well, it's
I
not
I,
why,
I
but it
think I
leads to it.
like it leads to that is the
Yeah,
core. Yeah,
it's definitely
it reminds me of
yeah.
like it reminded me like, oh, that's why her head. That's why. Yeah, I remember
That's
now.
why that situation happens.
Yeah, that's how she gets to that point. Yeah. So
So
you're gonna say something
earlier,
before I interrupted you.
yeah, yeah. I mentioned the writing earlier,
Hmm.
because I want to talk about something like the foreshadowing in the film. And I
Yes.
guess talk about the twist.
Yeah. Um,
I mean, I love it when films do stuff like this, and they just kind of lay out a bunch of little puzzle pieces
where they just
of.
where they yeah. I mean, yeah, they do it. Yeah, Fight Club does it remarkably well. Edgar
Mm.
Wright does it, and basically all his. Well, I mean, he just tells you what's going to
That's
happen.
that's like his whole thing.
He just tells you, like,
Edgar
yeah,
Wright spoils his own movies.
yeah. Um, which, to be fair, if the fact that Edgar Wright writes his film, well, not all of his films, but he writes his films like that, it is kind of like, well, you could just predict what's going to happen then. Like, it's not.
If you know him well enough and you know how his mind works in
Yeah.
writing, you can kind of figure stuff
I mean,
out.
that's not a diss on Edgar
Although
Wright. I think it's a.
he does less of the whole plot
Yeah.
spoiler stuff
He does it in.
outside the trilogy.
Yeah, he does it in Shaun of the Dead. And he does do it in Hot Fuzz, not as over. There isn't a
Not
scene
as
where
much.
Nick Frost is just like, here's what
He
we're gonna
doesn't lay
do.
out the plot as much as he does in The World's End and Shaun of the Dead.
Exactly, yeah. Um, but yeah, yeah, no, I'm not. I think the problem with that kind of writing though is it could become predictable. Like if you have all this stuff sort of laid out and you're like, oh well, that's gonna come back later, and I
Yeah,
think
but only if you're really looking for it, and if that's
yeah,
your entire focus rather than just watching the film.
yeah. I do think though there is possibilities where it's too blatant and it's just like, oh well, that's gonna come back later. I think in theory, I mean, I don't actively look for twists, like trying to guess twist endings, because that just
Yeah.
ruins the movie. But if something's made sort of blatantly obvious to me, I'm like, well, that's probably what the ending is, isn't it? And then I'm less engaged with it. But I don't go looking for it.
But I think this is an example of that sort of thing being done very well.
Yeah.
'Cause this time, because I was actively looking for things this time around.
Yeah.
'Cause I'd seen it before. I knew how things went, so I thought, okay, right, let's look for some clues. It was properly Blue's Clues of me. So quite early on, Peter, the son, is in a he's in like an English class, and they're talking about the tragedy of Heracles, I think it is.
Hmm.
Saying, is it more tragic for a character to have a choice to change their fate, or is it more tragic if they don't have that opportunity? And that's sort of playing into so basically the twist at the end of the film is that the matriarch figure of the family who died before the film begins. Um, she was like the leader of a cult, basically trying to summon one of the eight kings of hell, Payman, to Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, the plan was the reason she had a family was to, make this prophecy happen. The whole Heracles thing comes into it because basically the family in this film don't really have say in what's going to happen to them. It's kind of like they've been basically being puppeted from the start.
Mm. Yeah, it's a whole sort of
A conspiracy.
yeah, and I think yeah, I do like that whole like oh this was always like I don't that kind of stuff really also is quite unnerving to me. Just sort of the idea of like
Uh,
this is
you can't escape something
yeah,
that's
and
going to
that's
happen.
why Midsummer could at times could like something where like people are against you and like it's you can't like this is
And
an inevitable
conspiratorial horror.
yeah, and there's this inevitable fate of you're going to die. Like that is really quite again
I'll
unnerving.
talk about another example of this when we talk about Midsummer.
Yeah,
But
Midsummer is a lot of is quite a bit of that as well. Um, yeah, I do really like I like that the film isn't. Uh, I do appreciate that there aren't really like jump scares or anything, or like the film isn't actively trying to scare you. It isn't just like oh here's a scary bit. Like it's just a natural progression of the story.
it's trying to get into your like psyche and
Yeah,
freak
and
you out
there's some
psychologically.
yeah truly quite yeah the bit where I really I will say I'm kind of unnerved when characters just sometimes they just like contort their bodies in weird ways, just like randomly.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And when he's in the class and he just like raises his arm up, and then he and then he just starts bashing his head into the fucking desk. I'm like, oh mate, that's oh. And then when and towards the end, when Tony Collette is like banging her head on the fucking door, I'm like, oh, that is just horrifying. Like I don't like that. Just it's really quite yeah. I keep saying unnerving, but like that's just
That's
what
the
it
word
is.
for it.
It that's what it is. This film is unnerving.
It is what it
But yeah, I think
is. There was a shot that I noticed this time around that really freaked me out. And it's just before the whole climax kicks off. So it cuts. So just after like the dad is burned alive.
burnt. Yeah, burnt. Yeah.
There's an outside shot of the house, and then it cuts to like same shot but at night. And you just see all of these cultist members lingering outside the house.
Mm.
If like you're not looking for it, you won't see them.
No, I missed that. I did not notice that.
Yeah, and I recommend going back and having a look at that bit because once you notice them, it's like, oh, this isn't subtle, then
Yeah,
not exactly because you're looking at the house, you don't notice it.
exactly. I was focused on the house. I wasn't like oh looking out for this kind of stuff. And I think that's I do like that if you aren't looking.
Technique of drawing the audience's eye to a certain point.
Yeah, yeah, I think there's a lot to. This is a film that you can watch multiple times and pick up new things. I do. I think yeah, there's just a and I like that because a lot of horror. I mean, takes place at night, like just horrific things happening at night makes a lot of sense, and that's where most of the horror takes
That's
place.
going to change when we talk about the next film.
But in Hereditary, even there's where he's you know bashing his head into the desk, like that's during the day. When that middle aged woman is like yelling at him from across the street. That is during the day. I think
So
something.
the husband burning to death in my mind that took place at night, but
Yeah,
that's during the
it
day.
does take place during the day, and I think a night obviously works, but something about horror during the day can feel almost as unnerving. It's just like because you don't expect it, because sort of just
Yeah.
the hit the
In your
history of
mind,
it.
there's safety during the day.
Exactly, yeah. Like just throughout the history of horror, it all happens at night. When people in Scream, when people are killed, it is at night generally. In most horror films, it's at night. Freddy Krueger gets you in your dreams when you sleep at night. Like it's that kind of thing. But horror again, and I think, I mean, we're going to touch on this with Midsummer as well, but The Wicker Man, again, is horror during the day for a lot of it. And I think, yeah, because during the day you're like, oh, this should be safe. I should be fine. Nothing can get me during the day. And then,
And you aren't.
and then there's something, and then something happens, like, oh, fuck. Um, yeah, I think this film is paced fairly well. Like it's like it's a little over 2 hours, but it doesn't. It just stuff's always happening. Like every scene is progressing something. Whether it's Alex, Peter at school, or it's the dad and Tony Collette talking about stuff. Like it's sort of always progressing the plot, which is good because that's what films
Yeah.
should do. It's
Oh,
weird.
yeah, no, you want every scene to be vital.
Yeah. And it's weird that I'm saying that like it's unique, but I think a lot of filmmakers don't get that. Just like,
Yeah,
and that's why I'm slightly worried about Beau Is Afraid, because I feel like it may be like
maybe too. It's got a long run time, and
it.
I feel like surely everything in there isn't going to be 100%
Yeah, I'm
necessary.
pretty sure they were like. I don't know if Ari Aster talked about it, but I think someone was like, "Could you edit it down or something?" And I think I'm sure there's something where he's been asked about the runtime and he's commented on it. Yeah, Hereditary, yeah, is really good. There's the party scene where it all happens, and I'm like, I would feel so. I do think it is. Yeah, he just goes to smoke weed. That's more important than. Well, it's because it's with a girl he likes, rather. That's the thing, as opposed to the safety of his sister. Yeah, no, I just think there's a lot to take from the film. And yeah, it's a very psychologically based horror film, and that works
I was gonna
better.
say a lot of the stuff kind of revolves around potential mental illness, and a
Yeah,
lot of the thing, like the reasons the family start to dysfunction a bit, are to do with like grief and that.
yeah. I rewatched The Babadook recently, and I had to write an essay on it for uni, and I know you haven't seen it, so I'm not going to spoil anything.
From what I know, that's all about grief and shit, though, isn't it?
Yeah, like it's a woman. It's about a mother grieving, and there is a monster, but it's not about the monster. It's not just the monster
The
represents
monster is
more than just a monster. It's not just like something attacking her. It's more than that. Because I know I'm not saying that like every film needs to have like a deep theme, but or really be saying saying
But it's
something.
always nice when they do it done well.
Yeah. I don't like horror when it's just sort of monsters and creatures attacking people. That's just kind of boring. It's like I've seen that before. Give me
I
something
mean,
mentally.
yes, but it needs to be for a certain time period for me.
I think if the monster or whatever represents something more than just being a monster, I'm fine with that. But if it's just like a monster for monster's sake, then it's like, eh.
Like, oh, you could have done
Yeah,
better
you could
there,
have done
kid.
better than that. Yeah, I did. I do. I actually really like the scenes where they're communicating with like the glass or whatever, like that. I thought was actually really nice, and it like I just think, yeah, I just think this is a good film. I really enjoy it. I think it is a pretty good film.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I liked it more than I did previously, or I just sort of enjoyed it, but
Mm.
I think I got into it more this time around. I started to kind of really look for things.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Um, Want to put a number on it?
Yeah, I bumped my rating down. It is an 8 out of 10. I had it as a 9 before, but it's a very very strong 8, and it could go back and forth throughout. I just didn't
I
find it as effective, and that might just be because of the context of when I watched it. But it's still a really great film.
well, I've bumped my rating up. I had it as a 7 previously.
Oh,
And I've bumped it up to a that's a 7.5, but you know.
and then Midsummer. Um,
Should
yeah,
be a strong 8, but you know.
I I do really like Midsummer as well. I went in, and everything I'd heard had basically said it's just the Wicker Man, and I'm like, cool. And I mean, it definitely feels like it's got some like Wicker Man elements from it, but it's not exactly the same. I was expecting it to, but
Well,
like just the sort of
I am one of these people that makes a lot of Wicker Man comparisons.
mm,
And apart from, you know, obviously like the plotting is different
yeah,
and some more subtext in this film, but I
mm,
think it's very similar to the Wicker Man.
yeah, it's got yeah. It's I'm not saying it's not similar. I just expected it to be more to basically be like it again, but it definitely has elements. I don't know. I don't know if Ari has Ari. I have to imagine someone must have asked Ari Aster about it, like the comparisons between the two, because everyone makes these sort of comparisons to it. But yeah, I prefer Hereditary. I think Hereditary is better, personally. But I
I
still,
think I prefer Midsummer. I'm not sure
mm,
though.
I do really like Midsummer though. I mean, yeah, just to go into it, Florence Pugh as the lead, is fucking great. I think Florence Pugh's fantastic.
2019 was a great year for Florence Pugh.
Yeah, and he also had
But that was
Fighting
the
with My
year she became a
Family.
star, probably.
Yeah, and Little Women as well. And Florence Pugh is one of those actors where I'd basically be interested to see whatever she makes. Like I've got a very small list of actors where I'm like I will see basically whatever they make for the most part. Like I'm sure you've probably got a few actors that you're
Yeah, no, I definitely have some people. I mean, I think Florence Pugh's probably on a sort of maybe an outer circle of that, but she's definitely someone that I'm always
yeah.
interested to see what she's up to.
Yeah, like yeah, I'd say Florence Pugh, Adam Driver, Andrew Garfield, Anya Taylor Joy, Nicolas Cage, because obviously, um, Leonardo DiCaprio, Sam Rockwell, probably,
Oh, so Sam Rockwell's definitely one of mine.
and Colin Farrell. Actually, Colin Farrell. Now that I think about it, I think those are probably those actors where I'm like, I will pretty much be up to seeing whatever they make because they're all really great. Yeah, no, I think Florence Pugh does a lot with this. Again, she spends a lot of the film crying, and this could be one where maybe I could get an arc. I could see like maybe she's doing a bit too much with it, but I think she plays it fairly well. I don't think it's
I think it's at the right level.
it could definitely be a performance of like, oh, this is just too much happen. Like I just expected it to be a bit like as we said before, Tony Collette very much toes that line of not being too over the top, and I don't think Florence Pugh is, but it does feel like she could, like depending on who you ask, I think some might be like, oh, she's a bit too over the top with this, and isn't quite as
I think it plays with how other things are being presented, though.
yeah. I think again context matter. I think this film also is a very psychologically affecting film. Her is it what her boyfriend or whatever it is, or is it she know it like doesn't she know someone who like commits suicide? Was it?
Her sister commits
Yes,
suicide and
that's
kills her parents
that's
too.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. I think Ari Aster, just based on these two films, really deals with psychological horror and very affecting. Yeah, and I've heard Beau Is Afraid. People have seen it. It's apparently quite a. I mean, it's a character study, and it's got some, psychologically interesting elements to it. But yeah, we've also got Will Poulter as one of the guys in it. I like Will Poulter. I haven't seen him in a whole lot, but
It's always nice seeing him show up and stuff.
yeah, I loved him in Bandersnatch. Actually, I loved him in Black Mirror Bandersnatch. Yeah, I liked him in this. I've got who William.
What's his name? The Good Place.
Yeah, William Jackson Harper. Yeah, I've seen like one season of The Good Place, and it's okay. Like I'm not sold on The Good Place.
I quite like The Good Place, but by season 3, and they kept going after that, I got fed up. So I haven't actually seen anything past season 3.
Yeah, I've seen like the first season and a bit of season 2, but I don't know. It's just one of those shows where everybody says it's good, and then I watch it and I'm like, that's not as good as everyone says it is. But yeah, Midsummer. It there's a lot of, again, very very nice imagery. I feel, if I remember correctly,
a lot of very graphic imagery in this one.
Yeah, I'm trying to. If I remember correctly, isn't there like some overhead like shots of them in like? Or am I just imagining that? I feel like there's some overhead shots of like them in like this pattern.
There's a bit that I can think of where Florence Pugh's character, I think it's Danny. She like runs into the bathroom and then goes into the bathroom. It's an airplane bathroom rather than the bathroom in her house.
Yeah.
That's the way of transitioning scenes.
Yeah. I think this film, there's a lot. Again, there's a lot to take from this film as well, and she's dealing with, basically trauma is basically what she's doing. Is what she has to deal with.
She's got an emotionally toxic boyfriend.
Yeah, and his friends are massive dicks. They're very unlikable people.
I mean, Ari Aster's called this like a breakup movie, which I think is quite funny. In a way, yeah, it is.
I really, again, as we've sort of mentioned before, this film is very sunny. Like a lot of it is just during the day, and that adds.
It takes place in Sweden, where and it's like a time of year where the sun doesn't properly go down, so it's just kind of always there.
Yeah, and again, to make comparisons to The Wicker Man, as we're obviously going to do, it does sort of really like, it's sunny, but who cares? Bad shit will happen still, like it does not matter what's going to happen, like the guy falls off the fucking, like he jumps off the cliff. Yeah, that's right, he jumps off the cliff, and he isn't.
It's part of a ritual.
Yeah. And doesn't he like? I don't remember if there's multiple people that jump off.
2 people jump. One of them survived.
And that's just
his face with a mallet, which is not. That was an image I took a long time getting out of my head.
Yeah, and just because again, that's so psychologically like just fucked up. Like the idea of like falling from that height, but you're not dead. You're still just barely alive, but you're.
And then they have to bash your face in with a mallet.
And you can't even move either because like just your body is just broken. Like that is.
Because you're still falling off a cliff.
Yeah, and I'm just like, again, it's very brutal, but it doesn't relish in the brutality of the violence. Neither of these films like show like, oh look how.
It's still upsetting.
It's still upsetting, yes, but it's not trying to play it off or like this is cool or anything, or like showing like look how. Where it's not showing, and it's not showing it for the sake of like, hey, here's violence, we're gonna show it to you. It's necessary to the plot. Well,
yes and no. In that those are consequences of things that are happening, but we don't necessarily need to see it.
No, we don't need to see it, but I think. And to be fair, it arguably might be somewhat diminished if you do see it, like because it's the thing of whatever you make up in your mind is obviously scarier than anything you can be shown.
Well, you see, I think we should change that statement to whatever Ari Aster can come up with his mind as well.
Yeah, he's. I feel like, how does he come up with this shit? Because
I
he's
was gonna say, what happened? Who hurt him?
because this is stuff I would never even think of. Like that bit, yeah, like in Hereditary where Toni Collette's sawing her head off. Like I would never in a million years think, what is like one of the most, what is like brutal and just disturbing images can I think of? And I would never ever think of someone sawing their own head off. Like that's just,
A bit of piano wire.
yeah, that's just beyond my. It's just and but it's an image I just cannot get rid of. Like just it's horrifying. But it, um, yeah, I think again, Hereditary, Hereditary and Midsommar both remarkably shot films. Like there is some
Some
really,
really nice cinematography in both
yeah,
films.
and I think the way like in sort of this town they live in, well, not town, this sort of village, I guess it is. This area they live
Yeah,
in.
like the cultural group live.
Yeah, it's very
They're
nice. Like
kind of,
it's
yeah, it's not a village, but it's kind of like their commune. That's sort of what
yeah,
I call it.
yeah. It's very nice scenery. Like it looks really nice. I would not be against living there if it wasn't if there wasn't
I'd be afraid that a bunch of pagans would come and kill me.
yeah. That's the only drawback is, you may die.
This film, along with The Wicker Man, basically, actually, no, I tell you what, before I get to this, um, what is, let's have a discussion of what we find personally scary.
Alrighty.
Because for me, and this is something that's present in both these films, cults are up there. I find, well, any kind of mass with, a shared opinion that is ultimately quite stupid, I find terrifying. And that's
Yeah.
especially reinforced by this film. Basically, the way it goes down is, hey, we've lured these people here for our pagan, sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And two members of the cult, sacrifice themselves by going
Mm.
into a big wooden triangle and, burning alive. Um,
Yeah.
and they're given like a orb or something, being like, you will feel no pain, you will feel no fear. And then, the fire starts, and they're screaming because obviously they're on fucking fire. And to me, that hammers home that whole, oh yeah, it's all bullshit. These people have, been
Yeah.
absolutely brainwashed and are dying a horrible death for no reason.
Yeah. In terms of what I find scary, like in general, I can find like yeah, I do think just sort of a big group of people who believe stupid shit and you like just sort of an like inevitable
People that have tattoos of their sports team.
I find sort of inevitability quite
Yes,
unnerving. Like
being unable to. Like,
the concept of
I don't believe it's fate, but
yeah,
that the concept, if there are other people that are engineering like a certain outcome for you,
yeah.
uh, and there's nothing you can do to stop it, which is why I find the Wicker Man as scary as I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
And I guess to a slightly diminished extent, this.
yeah. I think yeah, the inevitable nature of it of like you cannot do anything to stop this. You cannot get out of this in any way. The only thing that can result from this is you dying is
Dying.
quite fucking terrifying cuz
And in a way that I'm not frightened by the idea, passing away, but like certainly being used as like a pawn in a pagan cult
yeah.
um, ritual, and some of the things that happen to the people in this film. If I wouldn't want to go
I
through that.
mean, I'm quite scared of dying, but it would be amplified substantially if I'm like, I know I'm going to, and there's nothing I can do about it. Like that is
Yeah,
terrifying. Like I can sort of live with the fact that like, yes, I will eventually die, but I would not be able to live with the fact that I know like it's gonna happen soon. Like there's that sort of hypothetical question of
I
like,
was
would you rather know
being
when you die or how you
being
die?
told
Is
how you die. Yeah,
exactly.
I
And
mean, I just that, that shit, you know.
yeah, I just think that I think yeah, inevitability is really quite yeah scary, and I think I don't know. I'm not as scared by like slasher films and films where real people are killing you, unless it's like this is real people killing you, but it's and same with Hereditary kind of, but there's sort of a supernatural element to Hereditary, and like in general something like real people, like if it's like just a regular person
Or
who's killing
something that
people,
actually realistically happened.
yeah, like something like an actual like if it's about a real just a regular guy who's murdering people, that's not quite as scary to me because I don't know, it just doesn't get to me on a sort of psychological level, and it
So that's something that we know from another podcast is justified being scared by more supernatural things as when it comes to like real things, you can feasibly fight against that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Whereas if it's something supernatural, you've got a bit less control over that.
yeah, exactly, which is why you know I if I occasionally have dreams where I'm being chased by something, but it's not just like a regular person or anything. It's always something like it's zombies or it's some form of supernatural being. Because if I'm being chased by like a real person, it's not. I mean, if it happened in real life, I'd be fucking terrified. But the concept of it isn't as scary as being chased by something that isn't just like human. And I think that I don't know. I guess it depends. I think it very much yeah is sort of a case by case basis on what scares people. Because I
Yeah,
know
and in Hereditary, there are. I find that film very scary, and there are supernatural elements to that film.
yeah
But for me, the thing that finds me, like that gets me the most scared is the cult side of it.
yeah I do think that's quite and
Heresy.
yeah and I do want to rewatch The Wicker Man because I really like that film as well. But yeah, just something about yeah this film just feels very yeah just a big group of fucking nutcases and they're gonna kill you.
And they're willing to do horrible things for their beliefs.
Yeah, they're yeah. I mean that's not too dissimilar from real life, unfortunately. Certain group,
Exactly, that's why I think it's
and that's
scary
why
because
it's
it's
scary
totally
because this is like in
it's
real life. I'm
in the
sure. Well, I would like to hope that in real life there aren't people this mental, but there are.
if you're listening to this and you've been sent from your spiritual commune out into the world, and you're planning on luring some friends that you've made over the last few years to your pagan festival, find a mirror, have a look at yourself, and think about what you're doing. I really think this one goes out to you.
Yeah, I think this film. I yeah no. I don't find Midsummer as scary. Sort of it's sort of something that I you need to think. I think Hereditary is sort of more obviously scary as you watch it, whereas I think
Just watching
Midsummer
it, whereas Midsummer,
is more of
similar
a
to
you
The
need to
Wicker
think
Man,
about it a bit. Yeah,
you see it in the cinema, you're on the drive home, and you're kind of thinking about it, and you get,
and then
ooh,
you're just like, ugh, fuck, that's scary.
nails in it.
Yeah, there's some yeah. Oh, there's a very extended sex scene in this.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that bit actually.
Yeah, where is it her boyfriend? And
Her
he,
boyfriend,
yeah,
yeah,
boyfriend, and he goes in, and there's just like a circle of women, and there's just a woman just sort of waiting for him, which is just like,
waiting for him, being like, impregnate me.
and it's just like, and we cut back to
Good
it
old.
several times, and it was getting to a point where I'm like, okay, this has gone on a bit now, like,
Wrap it up. He's got to come eventually.
yeah. It's just like, all right, I get the point of it, but it's like, can you not? Can you just? But we've gotten the point, Ari.
Not for like 5 Thanks.
Um, I I was looking at Beau Is Afraid because tickets are on sale for it now here, and it's rated. For those who don't live in Australia, our rating system is a bit different. You got G, PG, M, MA15, and R18 is the ratings we have for films here. And Beau Is Afraid has got a R18 plus rating, which means it's the equivalent of
Oh
an
man, Ari.
NC-17 for the for Americans. And apparently it has high impact sex. So that seems
I mean,
that
in the,
sounds
in the right context, I can get into that.
yeah, the Will Poulter and William Jackson Upper and that they just get what doesn't one of them get like skin? Isn't someone doesn't one of them get like skinned or something?
Will Poulter gets skinned.
And then isn't there like a
Um,
tree? Isn't one of them or like something like that? They become like are they? I mean,
but the one that stuck me most is somebody gets. I believe the term is spatchcocked. It gets made into I think it's called a blood eagle, where they like pull the lungs out through your back.
oh god, that's just the
He's like
concept
hanging
of
up.
that is horrifying.
He's still alive in that bit. The boyfriend after he flees from the pagan sex ritual, and he
Yeah,
runs into like the coop and he sees the guy, and the lungs are still moving.
yeah, that's
The
just
poor bugger's still alive.
yeah, yeah. It's called a blood eagle. I'm reading it here,
Like, yeah,
but yeah, and then one of them in a flower bed and that um yeah, there's just a certain air of like I think the film has a lot of again. There's some really great stuff in it. There's that elongated bit where all the girls are like dancing around like a pole or whatever.
I mean, they're gonna find the May Queen.
The May Queen, yeah, and Danny is the May Queen. And yeah, I don't know. I think something about human sacrifices feels yeah, it's not is quite
But
unnerving.
it's not even something, just human sacrifices in general.
Yeah, and I
It's not great.
something about like one of my favorite episodes of my favorite episode of Buffy kind of has something like that, and just that idea of like, oh yeah, let's just kill people to please our God, and it's just like if God was real, he'd probably be telling you, hey, can you stop that shit? You
It's
don't
like,
need to.
well, it's probably not, Christian God. It's
Yeah, I know, but
that's
it's
God, whatever is bloody
yeah,
called.
but
Human.
yeah, just people use it, but people using their like religion to justify bad things is
Justify horrible actions. Yeah.
awful. Again, happens all the fucking time in real life, which is the unnerving part.
Oh
Um,
yes, terror.
yeah, but I, yeah, I really like it. I do think The Wicker Man is better. I will. I,
Yeah, I think it's considerable.
I think most people would agree The Wicker Man's better. I think. I don't know.
I think most people that haven't seen The Wicker Man would just write it off, being like, "Nah, Midsummer," because it's
Yeah,
it's it's less old.
even though The Wicker Man is infinitely better, I would
Yep,
argue.
I agree.
I really don't know what else to. I feel like we've sort of touched on it all. I just think it it pushes a lot of my buttons in terms of like what is scary. I like there's a like sort of in terms like it's not it doesn't. I need to watch it again, but Hereditary sort of scared me while I was watching it. But the more I now that we've been talking about Midsummer, actually talking about it is scary. It's two very different kinds of things, and I'm not saying one or
Yeah.
the other is better. I think both are fine, but I think you need to real. I think it depends because maybe some people are into prefer one or the other. I think both. I think both work quite well, and I'm affected by both.
I
For
was
me.
gonna say I can actually go with.
Um, yeah, I don't. I feel like we've kind of touched on it all, haven't we? There's not actually as much to
Yeah,
say.
I'm pretty pleased with it all.
I give Midsummer an 8 out of 10 as well. as Hereditary?
I gave it a 7.5 out of 10 as well.
Yeah. So yeah, this is tying into Beau Is Afraid, which was originally called Disappointment Boulevard, which I prefer as a title. I think Disappointment Boulevard is a much better title, personally. That's just what I think. It's got Joaquin Phoenix, who
Wacky Packy.
I really like Joaquin Phoenix. I think he's really, really great. And yeah, it's just about this guy. We're gonna follow this guy's life basically for 3 hours or whatever. And I think, like, in theory, I like the idea of that. I think it just, yeah, sort of depends on the execution. I mean, that's just any film in general, but there's films that on the surface seem like this should be my kind of film, and then I watch it, I'm like, oh, that's not as good.
I don't know how I'm going to feel about it.
Yeah.
I've seen the trailer. I think, yeah, no, I'll go see it. But
Yeah, no, I'll go see it. It's just, it's not going to be my priority when it comes out, because something else is coming out the same day that I'm far more interested in.
is that Evil Dead Rise?
Yes, that is Evil Dead Rise. And yes, Evil Dead Rise I'm far more interested in. Beau Is Afraid, currently a 9 out of 10 on IMDb from 95 reviews, which is still fairly solid for, you know, a film.
Probably going to go down. Isn't it?
No, it's I'm sure it's gonna go down, but I mean, with like a little under 100 ratings, that's still a fairly solid average.
Yeah, well, it's respectable.
And I'm just having a look here. There is a review here that is titled "Absolute Cult Classic." I don't know. Can you call a film a cult classic? Like how does one
I
determine?
was going to say, I don't think you can call something a cult classic at the time of its release. I'm not
I
sure
feel
that's how
like
it
it's a
works.
film you need the perspective on to be like, oh yeah, this is a cult classic. You know, it's not.
I was going to say, yeah, if not. I
If
mean,
they
yeah,
just
not
called
many
it
people
like a
know about this
classic,
film.
like an instant classic or something like that,
Yeah,
that would
but a
make
cult classic.
sense. But cult classic, you can't determine that.
Yeah, that's not something that I think you can say straight off the bat.
Yeah,
Because if you then encourage everybody to go and see it, it
it's
stops
it's
being a cult
it's
classic.
it's it's just then a regular classic, you know,
Yeah,
provided if people see it. Because I feel like this is a film that's gonna really be.
I think it's going to be divisive.
It's gonna be very divisive. It's going to. I feel like that runtime is gonna put people off. I feel like people are not gonna want to see it.
Yeah, although general audiences, yeah, but I think film people would be like, "Oh, it's Ari Aster. Let's go
Yeah,
see what
I'm
he's
sure
got."
film people will want to see it, but is that enough to like have like for a film to do well? Like, I don't know. Like
Yeah, I don't know.
and it is apparently based off a short called Beau, so I assume it's I assume it's based off that because it's got the same. But yeah, I'll see it and we'll talk about it in the review of the year, which is so very far
Hey.
away. But we'll talk about it then, and yeah, then you'll see if we liked it or not. So thank you for listening to this week's episode. Next week it's going to be a very big episode. It's going to be a lot we're going to talk about next week. But the last episode was on Forrest Gump. That was interesting.
Yeah, no, there was heated debate in the studio.
Then yeah, go listen to that one because I think it's a bit interesting to listen to people with very very different opinions. And yeah, check out all the old ones. I did John Wick a few weeks ago. Again, fierce debate. Yeah. So check out social medias, Instagram and Facebook. Check out the other episodes if you want. You don't have to, but like it if you did. And I think that's pretty much it. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.